Good afternoon. Thank you for attending today's webinar to learn about what the latest DOJ-funded research and statistics say about crime and justice in the United States. My name is Greg Ridgeway, and I'm here today as the chair of the Law and Justice Statistics Committee for the American Statistical Association. The ASA is the oldest professional association in the United States, dating back to 1839, and we represent 15,000 statisticians, data scientists across academia, government, and industry. Along with the Consortium of Social Science Associations, we're happy to sponsor today's webinar to support our broader interest in evidence-based policy and data-driven decision-making. In my day job, I'm the Rebecca W. Bushnell Professor and Chair of Criminology and Professor of Statistics and Data Science at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm also the co-editor of the Journal of Quantitative Criminology. I previously served as the acting director of the National Institute of Justice and as the Director of Safety and Justice Programs at the RAND Corporation. Today, we're fortunate to have the leaders of the National Institute of Justice and Bureau of Justice Statistics here. This is our second briefing of NIJ and BJS leadership for congressional staffers. In our July briefing, NIJ Director Vigne and then BJS Director Alex Picchiro briefly overviewed their agencies and highlighted some of their research and statistical products. Today, they will each discuss one aspect of their broad portfolios. You'll hear about forensic science research and the National Crime Victimization Survey. Congress is a key NIJ and BJS stakeholder. So in addition to hearing about the extraordinary work these two agencies are doing, we hope to walk away from this conversation with an idea of your interests and how both agencies can better serve you. Our goal is for this to be a conversation. The last half of our time today is for your questions, which you can enter in the chat or pose live in that portion of the briefing. We are recording the beginning of this, but the question and answer is off the record. We're not going to be recording that part of it. We will make a recording of the introductory comments available to you. So without further delay, let me introduce our distinguished speakers. First, we have a nationally recognized criminal justice policy expert, Dr. Nancy Levine, whose research ranges from policing and corrections reform to reentry from prison, criminal justice technologies, evidence-based criminal justice practices. Prior to joining NIJ, which is the research, development, and evaluation arm of the U.S. Department of Justice, Dr. Levine served as the executive director of the Council on Criminal Justice's Task Force on Policing, and she served as the vice president at the Urban Institute, where she directed Urban's Justice Policy Center. She holds a PhD in criminal justice from Rutgers University. And we have with us today Dr. Kevin Scott, acting director of the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the primary statistical agency of the Department of Justice, responsible for collecting, analyzing, and disseminating statistics on crime, individuals who commit crimes, the victims of crime, and the operation of the justice system at all levels of government. Dr. Scott has been with BJS since 2017 in a variety of roles. Prior to joining BJS, Dr. Scott worked for the Congressional Research Service, for the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts, and as the director of the Policy Analysis Unit in the Department of Justice's Office of Legal Policy. He earned his PhD in political science at The Ohio State University. So again, we will have a discussion and then a Q&A portion after both speakers. So please, jot down some questions, be ready to ask them. You can use the raise your hand function. I can call on you to come off mute and ask your questions to share your thoughts at that phase. But to start, let's have some introductory comments from Dr. Levine and Dr. Scott, starting with Dr. Levine.
Thank you, Dr. Ridgeway, and thanks to all of you for joining, and thanks to the American Statistical Association for sponsoring this congressional briefing. I am Nancy Levine. I am director of the National Institute of Justice. I've been in this role since May of 2022. As Dr. Ridgeway shared, NIJ is the research, development, and technology arm of the U.S. Department of Justice. Our mission is to develop knowledge across a wide array of criminal justice and public safety topics and initiatives. We do that primarily through funding, grants, cooperative agreements, and some contracts to researchers out in the community to develop that knowledge. And we also spend a lot of our time taking that knowledge, taking what's learned, and translating it, making it accessible and understandable, and communicating it to the field to ensure that we're doing what we can to ensure that they are using evidence and data to guide decision-making towards a safer and more just community across the country. So we cover, as I said, a lot of topics, too many to list today, but I can't think of a topic that we don't do some research in or haven't in the past. But today I really want to zero in on our forensic and investigative sciences portfolios. NIJ has been a leader in supporting forensic science research for decades. In fact, we are the biggest federal funder of external research, so research conducted by research institutes and labs throughout the country. And we're very proud of that. Even within our forensics and investigative sciences portfolio, we cover a lot of different topics. Far too many to cover today, but I did want to highlight several of them. So those would be forensics toxicology, forensic anthropology, DNA analysis, ballistics analysis, and our very strong work in body armor standards. So first, let's talk a little bit about toxicology analyses. This spans a lot of different categories. I'll talk about one that I think is of interest to many in the context of the opioid epidemic and also other emerging drugs, including synthetic drugs that are very difficult for the federal government to keep up with because they change in chemical compositions such that they don't necessarily meet the list of controlled substances, and that makes it very difficult to prosecute when these new substances emerge. Well, we do a lot of work supporting research to conduct studies of seized substances to identify what they're made of, as well as to do toxicology reports of people who are deceased owing to overdoses. And that information is really useful in understanding new waves of different kinds of substances that are hitting the market, how those spread throughout the country geographically, as well as where are the public health and public safety challenges of people who are engaging in overuse of substances that are leading to overdoses and sadly to deaths. One way we do that is through a program called NPS Discovery, and that collects all this data nationwide. It's they know specifics about when they identify these cases and where, and that's been used in partnership with the DEA, ONDCP, other law enforcement agencies, both nationally and internationally, to identify new trends and find ways to address and curb them. We also do a fair amount of work in the toxicology space around cannabis. And there's two pressing issues among many that we support in research. One is that the Farm Bill had created a distinction between cannabis, which has these, can get you high, for lack of a better term, and hemp, which has many helpful uses across a wide range of applications. And so what is that distinguishing characteristic, and what is that threshold that makes hemp become cannabis? And that has created a lot of challenges in crime labs trying to distinguish between the two. And we have funded research to create better tools to enable crime labs to do so. Somewhat relatedly, we know, because we are very closely aligned with the law enforcement community, that one pain point for them is identifying when people are driving under the influence of cannabis, which of course has become more and more prominent as more states have decriminalized cannabis for recreational use. And so we're working with a couple of different researchers to develop field tests that are accurate in identifying whether people's driving is compromised or impaired owing to cannabis use. Moving on to forensic anthropology. If you are a reader of crime novels, you may be aware of this place that's informally known as the Body Farm. It is actually a lab at the University of Tennessee that includes area outside that has bodies that have been donated for the purpose of research, so that they can study how those bodies decompose under different conditions. This is vital information, along with a collection of 2,000 skeletal remains that they're using to identify cause of death, time of death, to extract out DNA from bones that are decades old with new technologies. I just had the pleasure of doing a tour of that laboratory at the University of Tennessee, and they're doing tremendous work there, and we're really proud to support that work. And that work in turn helps support our National Missing and Unidentified Persons system, which is called NamUs for short. And that system is a combination of a database that houses information about decedents, bodies that are found for which law enforcement or medical examiners don't have identification. And so they enter the specifics about those decedents in terms of height and weight and tattoos and, any kind of other distinguishing dental records and so forth. And so that is housed in NamUs, but it also enables members of the public to go into NamUs and to submit information about their missing loved ones, and to consult that database to see if characteristics of their missing loved ones match up with the unidentified decedents. NamUs also supplies forensic analysis resources to local law enforcement. So, and in partnership with the FBI, they do fingerprint records checks to see if they can match up decedents to identify them. They do work with dental records, and of course they do work with DNA analysis as well. One example to share is the use of familial genetic DNA, and this enables the identification of decedents with people who might not be direct relatives, like in the same nuclear family, but maybe cousins or nieces or nephews. And that has been used to both identify people and resolve missing persons cases, but also identify those who may have expired due to foul play. It has helped close dozens of cases, identify cases that were subsequently confirmed to be homicides, and close those cases and bring justice to those victims and their families. Finally, two more areas I wanted to share with you, and allow me to say there's so much more I can share, and if you don't discern the passion in my voice, I really love this work, and there's so much more I could be sharing if time permitted. But I wanted to share a bit about our investigative sciences work, and one example I'll give you among many is this challenge of ballistic testing. So again, I like to reference pop culture because we all think we know something about something when we watch, police shows, crime shows, and so forth. And one thing that seems to be common knowledge or conventional wisdom is that when you're investigating a homicide and you find some shell casings or bullets, you can say, oh, we'll match it up against the our database and figure out what weapon fired these bullets and be able to match that up with certainty. Well, that's, as is much of Hollywood, a gross exaggeration. There has been for a very long time. So for many years, crime labs and investigators have been using very basic 2D testing of the signature that's emitted on shell casings from a firearm based on how it passes through that barrel, right? And they were making a lot of pronouncements about that, and those were used in court and found to be very flawed. So one way that NIJ stepped in partnership with NIST is to develop 3D ballistic testing technology, and that has found to be highly reliable and has really transformed the field. This is incredibly important when we're investigating homicides and trying to identify those who have perpetrated them and bring them to justice. And then last but absolutely not least is our 5 decades plus long body armor standards program. NIJ prides itself in supporting the testing of police body armor, as informally known as bulletproof vests, right? To make sure that they meet the bare standards of rigor to protect our officers in the line of duty. I can't think of no thing that's more important than ensuring that when officers put on their protective gear, they know that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. And this really helps law enforcement agencies who are trying to procure new protective gear to know which vendors have products that meet the NIJ standards. And so we have testing standards, we have partner labs where the vest can be tested. And we have found that between 35 and 48% of submissions for testing fail. So we are really doing our part to ensure officer safety. I hope that this brief presentation has sparked some interest on your part in our forensics and investigative sciences work, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Levine. We'll now turn it over to Dr. Scott.
Thank you, Dr. Ridgway. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you to the American Statistical Association for putting together this webinar, for giving us a chance to kind of highlight some of what's happening at BJS. We, like NIJ, are housed in both the Office of Justice Programs and the Department of Justice. We are the federal statistical agency housed in the Department of Justice. Our responsibility is the collection, analysis, and reporting of data related to crime, criminal victimization, and operation of the criminal justice system. Key to that, or perhaps our highest profile or most well-known data collection, is the National Crime Victimization Survey. The NCVS, as we call it, turned 50 last year and is going strong, I'm happy to report, and has for the past 50 years collected data on criminal victimization and is the only source of information available in the United States on criminal victimization not reported to the police. We collect data on both non-fatal violent and property crimes. We collect data on whether those crimes are reported or not reported to police. The NCVS is administered as a national household survey. We talk to about 240,000 people a year in about 150,000 households, and we are able to calculate national estimates on both non-fatal violent victimization and property victimization from that survey. One of our significant kind of events or plans for the 2024 is the rollout or the implementation of a redesigned instrument for the National Crime Victimization Survey. You may ask yourself why, and part of the answer is we haven't redesigned it in 30 years. So it was more than due for a redesign, and we have been at work on this redesign for about 10 or 12 years. It takes a long time to come up with the concepts, to test them, to refine them, to retest them, and finally to implement them. And starting last week, we moved the new version of the National Crime Victimization Survey into production, which means that it's now being used in households across the country to learn about criminal victimization and decisions to report or not to report to law enforcement. Some of the things that we did in that redesign were things to make it a little bit more efficient, a little bit easier to administer, and a little bit more agreeable for the households that share with us their time to report on their criminal victimization. We tried to make it flow a little bit better and be a little bit more conversational as our interviewers, either in person or over the telephone, talk to our sampled respondents. We also wanted to engage non-victim respondents on a regular basis. Crime is relatively rare from a statistical perspective, at least. So not that many households we talk to at any given time are recent victims of a criminal victimization, but we're going to be talking to them again, and maybe they will experience a criminal victimization in the time that we talk to them again. And we want them to be able to answer our questions. So we developed a series of modules to engage them early on in the questionnaire to kind of make them remember what the NCVS is, and that when we come back to them 6 months or so later to re-interview them to see if anything has changed or if they've experienced a criminal victimization, they're more willing to participate and they understand the value of participating in the survey. Some key changes that we've made to the survey that I think will have impact for how we measure crime and criminal victimization in the United States. We still do this kind of two-stage approach where we screen crimes. We ask people if they were victims of crime, and then we walk them through a series of questions to help us, the interviewer, and then ultimately the data analysts understand exactly what kind of crime people were victims of. To do that, we needed to improve how we ask those screening questions, and we needed to change the flow of how we moved from that screening into what we call the crime incident report, where if a household reports a victimization, we ask them a series of detailed questions about that criminal victimization. Some of the changes we made on the crime incident report involve being more specific, that is, making sure that we're getting from each respondent affirmative or negative responses to a series of questions rather than kind of what we might call in survey parlance a select all kind of option. We've tried to move away from those so that we fully understand what we're learning from our respondents. But we've also made some changes in how we ask about questions. And one of, I think, the most significant changes in the new instrument is that we've updated how we ask questions about rape and sexual assault. In the old instrument, the instrument that we're retiring, we ask questions using words like rape, which are not are legal terms, and are not necessarily helpful terms to respondents who are not familiar with the legal terminology. We've removed some of that language and started to ask language that's more specific to a particular set of activities so that we can engage with the respondents more directly and better understand their experience, not just on victimization, but whether they've experienced a rape or sexual assault. Finally, and I think this is the thing that I get excited about, weird statistician things. And the thing that I get excited about with the new NCVS, among the other things, is that the questions that we're asking, that I talked about kind of engaging our respondents so they remember us. Those questions aren't throwaway data. We're asking them questions about police performance, their perceptions of the police that they interact with. And that's obviously, when you interact with law enforcement, you don't always do it as a victim of a crime or to report a crime. You do it on a regular basis. And so we're asking people kind of their assessments of the responsiveness, for example, of law enforcement in their community. And then we're asking them to measure, to try to gauge their community's safety. And these questions, I think, serve two purposes. The first is, from our perspective, is to kind of engage them a little bit more. But I think what this will provide us as a nation is good data on how people perceive law enforcement and their interactions with law enforcement. We don't have those data. And the safety, the perception of the safety in which people live in their communities. And I think those data, as we kind of build in those data and we get to understand those data, I think they're going to offer a really unique opportunity to better understand crime, criminal victimization, and the role of law enforcement in this country. And again, these are not kind of accidental things that we just kind of backed into with the NCVS. But I would say that we didn't go into these with the purpose of thinking about the data they would produce. But I think those data are really going to inform public policy and our understanding of the production of criminal safety in the United States. So why does this matter? Well, first, from a measurement perspective, you want to measure things correctly. And we think that we're making significant changes as we learn more both about how people experience crime and criminal victimization in our society and how that experience changes. The ability to ask questions in a way that keeps up with the times is obviously something that you want to be able to do, but you also want to improve your measures in objective terms. So we think we've accomplished that with our redesign of the National Crime Victimization Survey. Second, as I indicated, we are measuring previously unmeasured features of the experience that people have with both law enforcement and their communities. But one of the other things that we expect to learn from the NCVS, in the traditional NCVS, the NCVS that we're moving towards retirement, we would ask people basic questions like, did you seek out help from victim service providers? But we didn't ask them deeper questions about either why they did or did not seek out assistance from victim service providers. So a key component of what the government can do in part of its response to crime is to provide victims with services in the event of those crimes. And we as a country know something about how many crime victims seek out victim services. But for those that don't, we don't have any really good indicators about what barriers exist to their access to victim service provision. And I think that's asking people the questions in a survey I think without a doubt is going to be the best way to try to get those data and help us as a nation understand how to better provide services to crime victims as we, so there's a policy advantage there to meet a community that needs our support from the perspective of the government. And I think just more generally, the NCVS, the data that we'll get will help us better understand how people experience crime and how that situates in their lives and the kind of consequences of that crime and those experiences that they have in ways that we didn't fully understand. There is immense promise to administrative data. And BJS has spent a lot of efforts in a lot of other contexts trying to leverage administrative data for statistical purposes, as do other federal statistical agencies. But there are some things that you can only learn about by asking people questions and understanding their experiences and conducting effectively interviews and then aggregating the results of those interviews. And that's what the National Crime Victimization Survey does on a scale that is not done elsewhere in the country. And we think that taking advantage of this opportunity to learn more, not just about criminal victimization, but the kind of aftermath, the consequences of criminal victimization, are things that we think that the new redesigned NCVS will help the country answer.
All right, thank you to both of you. At this point, we'll transition into some Q&A. Again, we recorded the beginning of this, but all the questions and answers going forward are off the record. We're not recording